Welcome to the Cultural Kultivators podcast by Belay Creative and Cultivate Labs, where we explore the diverse and dynamic worlds of Filipino-American culture. In each episode, we delve into various aspects of film culture and speak with athletes, leaders, artists, and creators who are shaping and pushing the boundaries of their respective fields. And today's episode was recorded by CamperSnaps Sessions in Southern California. Shout out to Emmanuel. Follow us on all social media at Belay Creative or cultural.cultivators. Cultivators with a K. Joy Regullano is a writer, actor, comedian based in Los Angeles who wrote on the animated show Monsters at Work on Disney+. Previously, she also wrote on Jelly, Ben, and Pogo, a PBS kids show starring Filipino-American siblings, and Kung Fu Panda Dragon Knight, which is on Netflix. She was also recently nominated for an Emmy for her writing on Sesame Street's Word of the Day series. Check out the concept album for her Asian American comedy musical Supportive White Parents, now available on all streaming platforms.
We've known each other for almost a decade, actually more than a decade now. 2011. I can't believe it's 2024. I feel really old right now. Anyways, so I've been fangirling over you and stalking your career for probably more than a decade. From the time we met at Bindlesif Studio to now, you killing it in Hollywood. And so I just want to say thank you for coming.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's funny you say that because I feel like when I first saw your show, your stand-up show, I was like, oh my gosh, like Dave Chappelle endorsed her show, like she's out there doing it. I was fangirling you. So it's really nice to do this and to connect with you in this way.
Yes, and I also want to give a quick shout out to CamperSnaps Sessions and Emmanuel, because without him, we wouldn't literally be here right now and recording this episode. But before we get deep into it, I want to ask you a question that I ask all my guests, and it's, what ancestor or anyone who has transitioned on would you like to call into the space and conversation today?
I love this question. I'll call a few in, and I don't know if I'm just being a basic Filipino bee, but I'd love to call in Chief Lapu Lapu. Love thinking about his strength and just his what is the term? Stick-to-itiveness. I don't know. Anyway, Chief Lapu Lapu, and then all the babaylans of our past, and anyone who might be in my ancestry line. And I never met her personally, but my dad said that my great-grandma was a really great storyteller. So I like to think that part of her lives on in me, and so I'd love to call her into the space as well.
Yes, Lola String.
Yeah.
I love that. All right, so you told me via email you started the writing career in your school newspaper, and then at UC Berkeley with theater and sketch, and then you moved back down to LA from the Bay Area and started doing improv and, classes at UCB. So can you tell me what that experience was like as a pinay?
Yeah. So both of my parents are doctors. So it was always I thought it was always in the cards for me to be a doctor. I was going to take over my dad's clinic. And my parents they actually met on the school newspaper. So writing for the school newspaper was okay. It was approved. So I was like, okay, writing is an okay thing. Acting, not on the table. I always liked making people laugh, but I was like, I guess not in this life. But yeah, so when I went to UC Berkeley, I actually, one of the clubs that was, rushing during Club Rush was called Theater Rice, and it was an Asian American theater group. And I think that really encouraged me to, explore it as an option, because I was like, okay, other Asians are doing this, and actually a lot of my classmates were engineers and pre-med and stuff like that. So we kind of had this in common of, okay, maybe this won't be our career, but let me explore this. But honestly, once I got a taste for it, I was like, oh, this is what I want to do for my whole life. This is why the universe put me here. And so after I did that club and had that experience, then I switched to theater as a major at UC Berkeley. And then that was a different experience because the UC Berkeley theater department is not very diverse. Or at that time it wasn't. Maybe it is now. I don't know. But yeah, not very many non-white people. And so, yeah. And then I also tried to take screenwriting. There was only one screenwriting class at UC Berkeley, and I would pitch in the early parts of my career, I would pitch screenplays where the main character was Filipino, and I had teachers who would literally ask me, like, why is your character Filipino? Is there a reason? And I'm like, now it's such a bizarre question to ask. It's almost like, did I dream that? Like, they really said that, right? And I think I learned in my UC Berkeley Asian American Studies classes that white is the default, and that like to be something else has baggage, or like it has like there's some weird like, well, it's a choice, or back then it was, and now obviously things have changed a lot, which I'm really grateful for. But yeah, I mean, even when I moved back to down to SoCal and I was doing improv and sketch in LA, the various improv and sketch schools, they're not very diverse either. But over the years, I have been able to find like my Asian American, Filipino American tribe within comedy and within theater. Like I host and produce this comedy show called Filipino AF.
Nice.
So we've really built a community, because before it used to be that there would be one or two Filipinos or one or two Asians per improv class, and we didn't know each other. Maybe we'd see each other around the community, but doing these shows, and then my friend Will Choi started Asian AF, and through doing Asian AF and Filipino AF, we've like become friends in a really strong community. So yeah, things have changed for the better, and it's really great.
I love that. It's so funny you say all that, because I feel like you're describing my life in college.
Oh wow.
And doing improv UCB in New York.
Oh wow.
So I lived in New York for 10 years, and all throughout that time I was at Magnet Theater and UCB doing improv and sketch. And also was, broadcasting writing major at SF State. And the same thing happened to me. My college professor wouldn't let me do my final paper on Asian Americans in media, because in her white words, there are not enough remarkable Asians in media. And granted, like, I graduated a long time ago, right? Like 10 years before you did. But still, it's like that's the kind of, obstacles and challenges we had to face as Asian Americans.
Yeah, that screenwriting teacher that I pitched my idea to, one of them, I was like, I'd like to write something about my parents. And then she was like, well, what about if you did folktales? And I'm like, what? Like, why? Like, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with folktales, but I'm like, what's wrong with the real story of my real parents?
Yes.
Like, is it not worthy of a story to you? Like, it's so bizarre.
Exactly. And I think that's what kind of went through my head as a really naive college student. Like, we're not enough. I'm not enough. And so for a really long time, I thought, okay, I can't even explore this as a career because I'm not going to make money for a network or studio. So yeah, it's so funny how those kinds of people and that kind of messaging get stuck in your head until you decide to build your own table.
Yes, build your own table. And I think also it's so insidious too. Like, it's like the idea that like in improv class, you make a joke and you make a reference, I don't know, whatever, like a reference to rice and meat, I don't know, whatever, which Filipinos, eating with a fork and spoon, anything about that, we think it's funny. A non-Filipino audience isn't gonna always get it. So then you're like, oh, my experience is not relatable, quote unquote. My experience is the things that I think are funny are not funny, quote unquote, because nobody else laughed at it. But it was just the wrong audience. They just, because back then, of course, it was a lot of white guys. So they'd always like make jokes about Lord of the Rings or Godfather, whatever. And it's like, okay, well, I didn't think that was funny. But for some reason, it was like that was the default humor or something like that. And so I think, again, things have changed so much over the years, which I think people are becoming more aware of, like, race theory and these concepts.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Thank goodness Asian AF and Filipino AF exists now. Because I remember doing improv in New York. And yeah, I was one of, not just the only like Asian, but one of the only people of color.
Oh my gosh.
It was like being another black guy.
Wow.
And it was just like, I think one time we were doing, an improv session and someone yelled out, massage parlor.
Oh.
And I was like, it's because I'm Asian and I'm up here. And that like totally deflated me.
Woof.
And I let it like get in my head about all these racist MFs probably in the audience.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I totally understand. And I feel what you're saying.
Oh yeah, and I guess I'll take a moment to shout out that there have been like historically Asian American improv and sketch groups throughout the years. You know, of course,
Yes.
Spindle Stiff and Cold Tofu Improv down here in LA, East West Players, Asian American Theater Company. You know, there have totally been people who created pockets before us. So
Exactly.
to honor the people who came before us
Yes,
as well and
100%.
lay the groundwork.
But also in the mainstream improv scene, it was very few and far between.
Yeah. It was like Eugene Cordero.
Yes.
It was like, oh my gosh, wow, he's on stage. And I wasn't even 100% sure he was Filipino because, you know, it just didn't come up, you know, in an improv set. Like, it just, like, wasn't a thing that was going to come up on stage. I was like, oh, okay, I think he's Filipino, but I can't tell.
And then Renee.
Oh, yeah, Renee Gouvet. Yeah, totally.
I remember Eugene and Renee came up to the Bay and taught a little bit of improv.
Oh, wow.
For
That's
a little
so cool.
bit. Yeah. All right. So I want to ask too, you know, you being or having such a great background in sketch and improv, why do you think it's important to have this collaborative, creative, even experimental environment as a creative and writer?
Yeah. So I think the temptation as an artist is to like sometimes like hide your art away and like sit in your room and not share with anybody because it's so vulnerable and scary. Because here we are like creating from our heart and like looking at our deepest emotions and putting it on paper and putting it out there is really scary because somebody could be like, that's bad or that sucks or not laugh or whatever it is. So I think that like creating in community, collaborating, however that looks, whether it's in writing groups or having a writing partner or whatever, I think that really can encourage you and get you out of your head of like, oh, other people think this is funny. Like other people are struggling, having the same struggles as I am. And also, you know, it gives you deadlines, it gives you accountability. And you just get to practice trying stuff and not being worried about failing or not worrying about I gotta write what the market wants or I gotta write what the audience wants. Like it's just if you're creating with a bunch of friends and you're with other artists, then it just makes things feel so much nicer and happier. And then it's not about the people or the ego. It's just about creating and being in community.
Love. So let's talk about your work as a writer then and you know, being in a writer's room. So you recently wrote for Monsters at Work at Disney Plus. You also are Emmy nominated writer for writing for Sesame Street's Word of the Day series. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
What is the creative process like writing for kids? You know, as a new mom, I always think about that, like with really understanding what my kid and my child and my son is, you know, watching and soaking in. I'm very selective on what he gets to watch right now because he just likes to amplify and also like say whatever he's seeing on TV. And so what is that like as a writer?
Yeah. I think there's like maybe a few things that I think about with kids, and one of them is, well, Pixar and Disney do a really good job of like not necessarily even making them a different audience. Like it's just like, oh, like if a good story for kids is a good story for anyone. So there's that, you know, of like, okay, well, if you just write a good story, it'll work for anybody. And if it's clear to kids, it'll be clear to adults, you know, all of those things. And then there's the other part, I think, that like, well, they are sort of a different demographic, you know, like they find different things funny. They don't have knowledge of things like the Holocaust, you know, they don't have knowledge of things like, of war, you know, they don't know that stuff. So you're starting from a different starting place. So there are things that they're just not going to get. And then they also have a different sense of humor. So like, they're kind of more like, depending on what age, of course, but like super young kids, you know, they find physical things very funny and like bigger things and also like they've just learned like what is reality, right? So things that are like not reality are like very funny to them. Of like, okay, like if you put your shoe on your head, they're like, shoes don't go on your head. Like that is really funny to them. But an adult, you know, maybe slightly less funny. So I think honoring and respecting that they're not stupid. They just have a different POV of the world and different knowledge base. And then I said it like it was two things, but I guess it's multiple things that I think about. You know, I think writing for kids is inherently being of service, if that makes sense. Like it's like, okay, we're like teaching the next generation how to be in this world and So I think actually a lot of people who write for kids, unfortunately, there's usually not as much money as writing for adults. So usually people who write for kids aren't doing it for the money or to get famous. So I do think people who write for kids are generally just nicer, nicer human beings and easier to work with and have more balanced lives because they also might have a family and they're not as worried about I don't want to go home to my kids and my wife because I hate them. That would be adult live action. But for kids, that's not really a thing. They like going home to their families because they're more healthy mentally, probably. But yeah, the idea of Sesame really every year they kind of have a different theme or different objectives, and some years it's we want to create a kinder generation, and one year it was we want to talk more about diversity and inclusion and equity and having a fair world. And so I really love the idea of introducing these concepts at a young age and being able to show them how the world is, but then also show them how the world could be. Things it'd be cool. It's cool to help in the kitchen. It's cool to eat veggies, which it's funny because I think that I guess this is a little bit off topic, but I always, I thought veggies were great. I never thought veggies were not great. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing of Asians, we just eat veggies. It's not a thing that we think is gross, but white kids think it's gross. So I'm I don't know, what if we just create a world that Asian kids eat veggies and it's normal, So reflecting our reality, things like that. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, totally. And speaking of which, Sesame Street just introduced last year their first Filipino puppet.
Oh, yeah. Filipino and Korean Muppet maybe was the year before that.
Yeah. And I think his name is TJ.
Yeah.
And what's funny is Eugene introduced it.
Oh, yeah.
So shout out to Eugene again. But yeah, so his name is TJ and my son's name is AJ.
Whoa.
And I feel like if you made my son a puppet, he looks just like TJ.
Aww. Yes, they're doing a awesome job at representation over at Sesame. I think they're just incredible the work that they do, and they're just so ahead of the curve, and staying on top of things. It's really incredible what they do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was amazing to getting to work in that space. Did you always know you wanted to write for kids?
I always, my, the things that made me want to write for TV were kid stuff. So it was Fairly Odd Parents, and Iron Giant, were some of my favorite things growing up. And I was a big Nickelodeon animation kid, I should say, specifically animation, Pixar movies. I loved all that. So I knew I liked that stuff, and that I wouldn't mind writing for that stuff. I don't think once I and then my first internship actually, my first Hollywood job in a way was interning at Nickelodeon for the show Fairly Odd Parents for production. So I knew I would enjoy it. I think the thing that's tough was learning that there's not as much money in writing for kids. So there is a part of me that's well, gosh, if only I could make the same money writing for kids as I do writing for adults. That'd be the only thing. If we could just bridge that gap, I'd write for kids forever. So I didn't intend to kind of get stuck in that world. And I don't know if I'm stuck, but that's just where I've been paid as a writer to write in the last few years. But it's been great, and I think that there is a need for it. So I'm happy to be where I am for now.
Well, you also got to work on the PBS show Jelly, Ben, and Pogo, which I just discovered literally even before my research on you a month ago.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I was oh my gosh, it's about Filipino-American siblings. That's insane. And so someone that's written predominantly for kids, what do you think the impact does culturally when programming is focused on a children's culture and heritage?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a great show, and I love that you brought it up. Yeah, that was amazing show. Shout out to everybody who worked on that. But yeah, I guess I'll start with the impact when there isn't culturally focused programming. So when there isn't that, I think that you can feel, as somebody who's not represented, you start feeling invisible, or that you haven't contributed anything to society. When you don't read about your people in history books, you're okay, I am not even worth being in this history book, or the only part I was mentioned in was the World War II when we were the Bataan Death March, which my history textbook told us to pronounce Bataan Death March. I was like, that's not how you say that. It's like, am I crazy? It makes you feel crazy. Like, it's just like, no, this is not the history I know. And then like I remember my white friends, like they'd be like, oh, like my great grandfather was Johnny Appleseed, and then I'm like, oh. Well, my great grandfather, like I've learned since, like as an adult, like, oh, my mom's uncle was a Secretary of Justice in the Philippines. Yeah, or like my mom's other relative, like I forget how she's related, but like one of her relatives, like was the Betsy Ross of the Philippines, like sewed the Revolutionary flag.
Oh my gosh!
And that's cool, but it's like, well, it's not really. We don't read those names in American history books. So then you start to feel like, yeah, my family has contributed nothing to society, or like I am invisible. And my experiences not only don't matter or are invisible, but I'm crazy for even like they're not even mentioned anywhere. Am I crazy? Like, did this happen? Yeah. You know? But when there is culturally focused program, when you do have representation, kids like feel like, oh, like that person looks like me. Like I exist. I am normal. I am beautiful. You know, or I don't know. I don't even know how to say it more than I exist. I am, and my experiences are worthy of being shown on TV, and I am relatable. You know, my stories are relatable enough that it's somebody greenlit it and somebody is broadcasting it and spent the time to like make this, and seeing your experiences represented too is like, oh, like, I'm not crazy. Like, it's like one of the episodes on Jelly Ben and Pogo was about sending a balikbayan box. It's like, oh, like, I do that too. Oh my gosh, like, I'm not alone. Like, wow, there's all these people who are like me. Yeah, there was something else. Oh, yeah, okay. So we had, back when I was a Sesame Street writing fellow, we had some speakers come and talk to us. And we had a speaker that had created, what's that one? Oh, Doc McStuffins. It's like a really big show for kids. And she was saying that actually, so Doc McStuffins, when that came out, like little boys started saying, can I be a doctor too, or is it only for girls? So it's so crazy. It just takes one huge show to like even make a little boy think that only girls are doctors. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's like representation is so huge.
Yeah, that's amazing. I just keep thinking about like when I was a college student and my professor was like, you can't do your final paper on Asian Americans because there's not any remarkable. I wonder if she's alive today because I want her to listen to this podcast and eat her words.
Yeah, that's wild to like literally say nobody. Like it's like, okay, so what about all the people who like, I don't know, made Buddhism a world religion? You know, like what about all of the like emperors and like warlords and like any of those? Lapa Lapa killed Magellan. What about any of those people? None of them. Oh, wait, I guess you said Asian Americans.
Asian Americans. But still, there was like, in media specifically, there was Lucy Liu.
Oh, yeah.
And Michelle Yao. Like,
yeah, even the stars of old Hollywood, Cecil Hayakawa and Anna May Wong, you know, all of those people that made, that's such a ludicrous thing to say. And erasure.
Exactly. So, yeah, I just wanted... Thank you for bringing that up. And thank you for the work that you do in children's television. I think a lot of people don't understand how much it takes to do children's writing and producing and creating for kids. And I love how you frame that as it's an act of service.
Thanks. Yeah, it's even like, it's funny. I appreciate that because it is a lot of work because we'd get notes back from curriculum for like any of the shows I'd worked on. And it's things I would never even think about. Like, it's like, oh, you can't write grapes in because it's a repeatable behavior and kids can choke on grapes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. But they're so impressionable at that age. So there is like a responsibility in writing for kids.
And that's something that we interviewed Josh from Blue's Clues, one of our first episodes. And that was the thing that surprised me, too, that there's actually a curriculum and a lot of, you know, children's development research that goes into shows like this. And it's very intentional, the things that are, like, put on screen. I mean, as opposed to other shows like Coco Melon, where it's more like drugs for kids. So that's why I really appreciate writers and creators like you who actually are, you know, want to have more positive things for children, not just consumption.
Totally. Yeah, it's funny. I've written a lot of things And some of the most fulfilling stuff, like one of the most fulfilling things was getting to be part of the launch of the Korean American Muppet on Sesame. It was like, oh, like even though like my demographic doesn't necessarily watch that, or they only did because they had kids, it was like, oh, like how fulfilling to be part of this, to be part of expanding the Sesame universe, and being more inclusive of like more people's experiences. It was so cool.
Well, I kind of want to switch gears now because I want to talk about a project that's more closer to home and more dear to your heart. So a couple of years ago, you created a comedy musical called Supportive White Parents about an Asian girl who wishes on a shooting star for supportive white parents. What was that inspiration for that musical?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, both of my parents are doctors, and my dad had a clinic. And in my mind, I was always going to take over because, I like put so much pressure in my mind of like, oh my gosh, these clinics are everything my dad's like accomplished here in the United States. Like he had no shoes in the Philippines. He had that typical like background of he grew up in the provinces, and he put himself through school because he got a scholarship and then came here to the U.S. and made himself a doctor, like that kind of thing. So I was going to be a doctor, and then like I mentioned, I went to UC Berkeley and changed my mind. And then my parents were really disappointed. But meanwhile, all of my white theater classmates, their parents were so supportive. They came to every show. Mm-hmm. And my parents did come to shows, but, it was a different level. Like, my classmates' parents had enrolled them in, like, community theater and, like, acting classes their whole lives. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I was catching up. And I was so bummed out. I'm like, oh, like, I wish I had these years that they had. But meanwhile, they're like, wow, but you have discipline. Like, I wish I knew how to play piano and violin. Like, I wish I did Kumon, and I wish that I had done Kung Fu, all these things that you did when you were a kid. And so I was like, kind of tucked that in the back of my mind of like, how interesting, grass is greener, that kind of thing. But it wasn't until I came to LA, and then I started I did this show called Trump in Space at Second City Hollywood, and then that's where the composers of that show, I was like, I started opening my mind of like, oh, I guess I could write a musical, because I'd never written music at that point. So I was like, okay, like maybe I can collaborate. Speaking of collaboration, like maybe I can write the lyrics and the script, and I can ask someone else to write the music. And I had written like really bad high school poetry, which I always say is like, I think it's like a sidestep away from humorous lyrics. So, and comedy songs. So I was like, okay, I think I can write lyrics. I think I can make that happen. And so yeah, those composers said yes, Sam and Tony. And so we went back and forth. And after actually, speaking of UCB, I took an 8-week class at UCB called Writing a Half-Hour Stage Show. So it started as a half-hour stage show. Nice. And I wrote that in class, and then I sent my draft over to the composers, and then they spit me back drafts of each of the songs. And we just started developing it from there, and that was in 2018. So that was almost 6 years ago now. Wow. Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
And you perform parts of it at Sketchfest, right?
Oh yeah. I've put up like songs here and there. We put it up like a reading of the hour long. We've had like so many different versions of the show. Last year in the Bay at Bindle Stiff. Mm-hmm. It wasn't part of SF Sketchfest, but I was already up there for Filipino AF, so I'm like, let me just put this up, and a lot of us were already going to be there. And yeah, I think. Oh yeah, the other thing I forgot to mention was that I think that I had the idea of like, oh, like wishing on a shooting star. That's like just can't be enough for a musical, and it's like a very clear want. And one thing that I love writing is like a trope, but like finding a spin on it. So the trope is like, wishing on a shooting star, or like a wish fulfillment story that like goes a little bit wrong. So I was like, oh, I know I can kind of put this idea in here. And the other thing I want to say is that so I almost majored in Asian American Studies, or minored in it, and I really loved learning about critical race concepts and all those things, ethnic studies, but I didn't find a way that I could write about it or talk about it that would make people listen, because I was like, well, when I was in college and I was first learning about it, I was just really angry. And of course, it's really hard to listen to an angry minority, especially an angry female minority. Yep. I even turned off other Asian Americans. I'm like, how did that happen? I think East Asians at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, not to throw shade, but especially affluent East Asians, are easy to throw other Asians under the bus. But anyway, besides that, I over the years coming to LA, speaking of being a Filipino, in the sketch comedy world, I started learning that I could write about race in a funny way, and then people did laugh at it, and they kept listening to me, and they didn't turn it off. So I was like, okay, like I think that I think this is the way I can make people listen, because like I wasn't given the gift that my Asian American studies professors were of like being able to talk about race in like a very like coherent way. Like I would always kind of like lose my words, but in comedy I found a way to like present it that made people laugh, but then they also like saw the truth in it. It was also satirical. I mean, I like to think that it is, like, that it does all those things. So yeah, I think that is part of what makes supportive white parents feel almost like it makes it feel really fulfilling to me that like, okay, like it's about my personal emotional journey of like learning to accept my parents for who they are, because I've just had to accept over the years, like, okay, like they can only give what they were given themselves. And so it's been this healing journey along with therapy, obviously, of like, okay, like my parents, they're supportive in their own way, and I've had to like kind of like find those ways and like accept them, because here's another thing that blew my mind in my healing journey. I learned that wanting my parents to be different actually isn't loving them. Wanting somebody to be different is not love, and that's what they wanted for me. And I'm like, oh wow, so loving my parents means accepting them for who they are, including their limitations and their imperfections. So it has this emotional personal grounding of like, wow, I really wanted my parents to like love me for who I am, which is like one of the main songs. But then also like it's like in a way my thesis on like a bunch of race topics of like, because I think the way that race is the discourse of race in America is a lot of white and black, or even Latinx and white, but not really like Asian and white is not really as much in the discourse. So it's like all these ideas I have about like how Asians relate to white people and vice versa. So yeah.
I just need to take a breath right there.
Yeah, so I like just talked. I talked so long.
You said so many things that like, oh, I really don't touch on that. I want to touch that. I want to touch that. So, one of the things that I really want to touch on, that I think really blends in with the intention of this podcast, is this idea of ancestral healing, and this idea of generational healing, and that oftentimes, and I say this a lot just in my own social media, that we are not just our ancestors' dreams, but we are also their healing in the way that we in this generation have the capacity to go to therapy, have the ability to think outside of ourselves and not just be in survival mode, unlike the generations before us that didn't have that possibility. And so when we are actively healing ourselves and the trauma that has been placed on us through colonization or whatever, racism, then we are actually loving our parents and healing them without them even having to do all the hard lifting. And so you saying that is like, wow.
Oh, that reminds me of Turning Red. Actually, was all about that.
Yes,
like, about the daughter healing herself, and then she finds her her mom in that as a young girl in that forest, and like they both heal.
Yeah.
So yeah,
the inner child.
Yeah. That's so beautiful.
So beautiful. No, but yeah, sorry.
No, yeah.
I need to speak on this because this is exactly like the stuff that I say. And I think also as a comedy writer, it's something so genius about putting things like race theory and, generational healing into a musical that's like an easier pill to swallow for folks, especially people who might not be Filipino, and see things in a different way. That's not just, let's just say it, white.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I loved so much about Iron Giant is that like it's actually about, have you ever seen it?
A long time ago.
So it's about like jingoism and nativism and like fear of the unknown. It's got these really heavy topics like nuclear war, but it's actually also a story about a boy and his robot. So it's like, oh, this very simple emotional story, but it gets to talk about all these huge themes that are very adult and very like complicated and nuanced. So in my work, I strive to find that balance.
And again, as a mother, I appreciate that. Okay, so as a pinay finding success in Hollywood, writing for numerous children's shows that are on TV and streaming, being Emmy nominated, and also I'm gonna say this because even though you weren't technically a reoccurring character on Supernatural, you were on Supernatural for more than one episode. How many episodes?
Gosh, yeah, I guess if we're counting the recaps, I think at least maybe I was in at least one or two other recaps, maybe.
Yeah, see? And so I feel like your huge success. So has your creative journey always been supportive of your parents post-graduation? And if they weren't and it wasn't, how did you get through it when they weren't as supportive?
Yeah, no, they definitely over the years have not been that supportive, but then have in the arc of their characters, they've become more supportive, I think, as they've seen I think it was a few things okay, she's not going to stop doing this.
Yeah.
And then, she can make money doing this. Okay, she's okay. She's not going to be homeless, I guess. So I think over time they've become more supportive. But I think it was they just didn't know, mm-hmm. They just didn't know it was an option because they didn't have that option, like you said. And one of my friends, she's South Asian or Indian, and she actually spent the time to educate her parents about her our world. She's an actor too, and I always respect that so much. Now her parents get it. They have opinions about best actor and the Oscars and things like that. I'm wow. So if you feel up to the challenge of bringing your parents into your world and teaching them, power to you. I think I'm not there yet, but so how I got through it, yeah. So they used to always say stuff they'd encourage me to go to post-bac. They would tell me for med school. They would tell me that this is a young person's career. They'd be well, what about the next one? Maybe you had a good year this year, but what are you going to do when you get old? They would say all that kind of stuff. And that was really, really hard. And there was a time where I just didn't go home that much. I just didn't talk to them that much, and that was what I needed at that time. And then because over the years I would look up post-bac programs. I'd be oh, maybe I should go do that. They'd try to bribe me. They'd be well, if you go to post-bac programs, we'll pay your living expenses. And I'm oh, money. That's so wow, that sounds great. And then I just have to remind myself, go back to your connection to the divine or your purpose or however you call it. Okay, I don't think that the universe put me here to be a doctor, and that's been a hard thing to accept because the little inner child in me wants to be who my parents wanted me to be, But I just heard this in a book, but it's as you grow up, you learn your parents aren't your higher power. Your parents aren't your God. They didn't put you on. You came through them actually. So, but we're whoever your creator is or whoever the universe, whoever made you, they're your ultimate parent, I guess. So thinking of getting some connection to okay, that's why I was put on this earth actually, and kind of holding on to that during the hard times, or the other connection that I think about a lot as far as purpose, when I get a role. Some other Filipino girl gets to be wow, that person looks like me. I can do that. Or if they watch my work, watch something I wrote, and they relate to it, actually I'm creating for me, but I'm also creating for others. And I'm being of service in that way. I am writing a story that no one else was ever going to write. If I have written many scripts about my parents. Who else was going to write that? Nobody else in my family is a writer. My parents are not writers. So I get to memorialize my parents in that way. So having some connection to well, how is my work greater than me, actually? Yeah.
I just want to cry sometimes when I do this podcast. But yeah, 100%. I think, as an artist myself, and, my mom, I think her level of success is it giving you health benefits? And so for me moving to New York, that was one of the biggest arguments me and my mother ever got into, was I was leaving my world behind and the steady 9-to-5 job with health benefits, and I was going to New York to be an actor, and I had nothing set up. And so that was the biggest argument we went through. And she's finally come around to her senses. But I 100% get that. And I think what really grounded me in New York and to keep going was to look at the bigger picture And what is it that I'm creating for not just myself and my community, but for future generations that might one day, and for me, it's always quality over quantity, right? The one kid, the one Filipino kid in Iowa or Illinois or whatever that doesn't have the access to Filipino community like we do in California gets to see themselves on TV or hear their story in a movie or see what a Lolo and Lola is in a musical. You know, I think about that one kid, that one person that might be struggling but has a connection to our art. And I think then it's all worth it. And to me, it's not about millions of people paying millions of dollars. It's about, like you said, acts of service. And I think that's what really grounded me as well through all the hard times of, am I going to make it? Am I going to make rent?
I love that. Oh, and I should also shout out, of course, therapy helped me get through
Yes.
it. Self-help books, finding happiness. Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't even get what inner peace was when I was a kid. I'm like, what is inner peace? But now I understand, like, okay, like, it's like finding a sense of worth and purpose that's like outside of other people. Like, okay, I am worthy and lovable just because I am a human being, and I am happy because I choose to be happy today, and I choose to look at all the things that I have and the abundance of that, versus like, I'll only be happy if my parents love me, or I'll only be happy if I am successful, or if I make this much money. Like that is you'll find if you keep doing that, you'll find it doesn't really like fill you up, I think.
100%. It's this unattainable chase for validation outside yourself.
Yeah, I used to do that. I used to be like, okay, if all I have to do is I want to be a paid TV writer, and then my parents will love me, and then I will then I'll have enough money to live, and then I'll be okay. And then I got that first TV writing job, and I was like, oh, like this didn't actually solve my problems, and it didn't make me feel worthy actually. So finding another source of feeling worthy, which is just being fully yourself. Oh, and the other thing that you made me think of was like whatever anyone does, because I think sometimes I get caught up in like, well, only certain careers or professions are worthy. Like only TV writing, if you're famous, only that makes you worthy or visible or whatever. But like thinking about like whatever your passion is, like for example, Marie Kondo, she loves cleaning, and I bet she never thought that like, oh, she would become a millionaire or however much money she has. And she also is of service. She helps so many people bring order and peace to their lives. So it's like, okay, like all you have to do is like follow your passion, whatever that is. Other people's passion, I don't know, it could be a business, and then they make a lot of money, and then they can be patrons of the arts, and that's how they make their mark on the world. So whatever your purpose is whatever you were meant to do is what you were meant to do.
I just want to do a time check.
No, keep
I know. And I'm just like, okay, how many more questions do we have time for?
Oh yeah, I can go a little faster too.
No. You're perfect. Okay, so I think we already discussed this, but what was your biggest challenge as a writer, and how did you overcome it?
Biggest challenge. I mean, I guess I would say it would have to be, and this is probably generational trauma, speaking of, the feeling of unworthiness and feeling like this deep feeling of I'm bothering people, or nobody wants to hear my story, or I'm a talentless hack, any of that stuff, like your own ego that perhaps is like inherited through trauma has been a struggle for me. And how, I would say I still wrestle with it today, and, affirmations and finding spiritual grounding, being in community with people and support groups and books, all of those things I think have helped me move through all that. And then also, connecting to being of service, and how actually me sharing my story is for others as well.
I also want to add, I think we've touched on this a lot in this conversation, but this idea of us being mirrors for others, and also people in our lives becoming mirrors for us, and seeing ourselves in these people, I think is a beautiful reflection of what's possible and the work that we get to do. And I feel like I'm seeing so much of myself in you. So I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're sitting here today after being fans of each other for almost more than a decade. So I really want to thank you again for the continued work that we don't get to see, that you do on your own.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for all the work you do. And, this is kind of a funny way to look at it, but I'm like thinking about, I forget who that guy was, but there was a guy who got on SNL and then people dug through his Twitter and found a bunch of racist weird tweets, and then he just had to didn't even get to be on SNL, had to resign or whatever happened with him. But it's if he had just worked on himself, maybe he would have a job now, so it's almost obviously there's working on yourself to work on yourself, but working on yourself helps your career too, honestly, so then you won't have to be, your future self will thank you so you don't get canceled for saying something stupid or shitty,
Because we've all been there. We've all said something stupid or shitty, but 100%, yeah. I feel that. Okay, we're going to wrap this up because I think it's been almost over an hour. But what is something you wish someone had told you before you started show business?
Yeah, gosh. There are so many things. I guess it's that thing I said earlier about finding worth in something besides your career or accomplishments, and it's also a journey of loving yourself as a person and an artist. And then it's a long, hard road, but there's this Obama quote that I always butcher, but basically he says that when you get caught up in how hard the road is, just put your ego aside and keep your head down and focus on the work. So in our case, the work is representation and telling people stories and doing good in the world, that kind of stuff, versus why aren't I making enough money, or when's my next job gonna come? If you're just engaged in the work of I'm doing what I need to do every day, then that stuff doesn't matter.
Amazing. Another thing I wanted to ask, it's not written here, but what's next for you? And if people want to support or come watch Supportive White Parents, where can they find that?
Yeah, well, we're actually working on doing another reading of Supportive White Parents, the full length, in a few months. So you can stay posted on the Supportive White Parents Instagram for that, and you can listen to our concept album. We have some of our songs on all major streamers, Spotify, Apple Music, etc. And specifically, I have a show coming up, Filipino AF at SF Sketchfest. So you can go to the Filipino AF Instagram or Twitter to find out info on that, or you could just follow me on Insta to hear about all my upcoming shows.
And when is that show?
February. Wow, it's
coming up.
Yeah, I know.
It's literally next month. When this airs, I think it's going to be next week or something.
It's Saturday, February 3 at Marsh Main Stage at 9:30 p.m.
Okay, I'm going to be there.
Oh,
I'm
yay.
totally going to be there.
Exciting.
All right. So last question. What are you currently geeking over? It could be anything.
Oh, what am I currently geeking over? Wait, you first.
Oh, gosh. People have not asked me this question. Oh, man. I mean, I'm having to do a lot of research for the podcast. So I'm reading multiple people's books. So Berna Anat, she does this financial book for just people of color. And so I'm trying to get into investing more and thinking about my family's future and money. So definitely reading her book.
Oh, that's I should read that book.
Yeah, everyone should read that book.
I actually, speaking of, I have been geeking out about stock market trading, because I guess I didn't say this, but you should also have hobbies and a full life when you're trying to be an artist. Because if all you're doing is trying to be a writer and artist, and all you're doing is hustling, then you have nothing to write about. I keep hitting my water bottle. So one of my hobbies, I've been doing ballet. I'm not great at it. It's just a fun hobby, and it's exercise, and then learning about the stock market, which is very different from writing and acting. So that's fun, and money. And is there anything else I've been geeking over? I guess food. I love being inspired to cook something fun. Nice.
What's the last thing you cooked that was fun?
Oh, the last thing I cooked. Well, I guess I call them food projects. And so one of the things I cooked recently was it was a Thai dish called what is it called? Oh my gosh. pad kaprao.
Oh yeah,
it's like basil and
I
made
love
it
that.
Yeah, it's so good, and I've just never made it at home because I didn't grow up with it at home, and it's like, oh, this is actually not that hard. So I love doing that kind of stuff. Oh, I learned how to make Din Tai Fung copycat green beans. Have you been to Din Tai Fung?
I love their green beans.
Oh my gosh, they're so expensive. So I learned how to make them, and then I learned how to make Din Tai Fung copycat cucumber salad. So that's been what I've been taking to potlucks and stuff.
Awesome. Okay. I know this. I said it was going to be my last question, but I feel like there's something more. Is there anything else that you want to plug or shout out before we end?
Gosh, no. I think that's it. For now, yeah, just follow me on Insta for any upcoming shows that I might have. But thank you so much for having me, and thank you, CamperSnaps and Emmanuel. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. I'm so excited to find out what's coming up for you and your musical. And I'm wishing you all the good energy from the universe to get this out there into the world so more people can see it, especially Filipinos.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone happens to have, $2 million to help send us to Off-Broadway, that would be amazing.
There you go.
Hit us up.
Hit Joy up. All right. Thank you so much, Joy. Have a great day. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All parents suck in their own special way.
Doesn't mean that you should make a wish for them to go away.
Look at all the ways they treat you, how they show